It's a new year, a new roster, and that means new scheme. But what could that mean? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to Locked On Vikings each and every day. I appreciate you all so very much, and I appreciate y'all if you are new here as well. Hello and welcome. My name is Luke, and you can find Locked On Vikings by searching it out anywhere you listen to podcasts, whether it's an app that hosts podcasts like SiriusXM. You can find us on that app, as well as hometown broadcasts of any perhaps major sporting events that you are maybe interested. Just search out that team. You can also find Locked On Vikings on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Today on the show, it is Twitter Tuesday, and that means I'm answering your questions submitted by you via email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. The Google form in the show notes will also do, or I will put out a call on Twitter on Mondays, and you can find it there. So we are going to answer those. And the first one that I am going to answer today comes from Run Game Enjoyer, who asks, after listening to your breakdown of Brandel and how he's more of a power and strength O-line instead of an agility type O-line, the Vikings have aimed at before thinking Ezra, Bradbury, O'Neal. Do you think there's a future where KO is wanting to copy what the Rams are doing with their change of run game away from a zone game scheme to a more power scheme? I had not thought of this at all, but it does. That makes a lot of sense. That's like good call. That maybe they're trying to do that a little more. But here's the deal. And this also could feed into why you don't necessarily want Reisner anymore. If I remember, Reisner had a couple of rough pulls. Maybe he had really good pulls. Sometimes I forget, but it was something I remember noting it. Here's the thing with gap scheme. So when you say gap scheme, you're talking power, counter, you're talking, everybody is down blocking, which means you're blocking against the action of the run. If it's a left run, you're blocking to your right. And that means defenders are going to be coming through you, like if you think about those angles. So down blocking is like an easier angle. It makes everybody's life a lot easier, except for the puller. The puller's job is really, really hard. So you need guards and tackles that can pull if you're going to be running power. Power, typically a guard is pulling. So somebody like Brandel, somebody like Ingram is going to have to get out and get their ass in gear and move and pull. That is still going to, like most of the time, you're going to be asking your line to just drive someone, to just get your hands into someone and move them proactively. And it doesn't quite have it's not that it's not technical to down block, but it's way less technical than reach blocking is. And like anything you have to do in zone, in like a zone duo mix kind of thing. So if you are leaning further into strength and away from speed and agility, then power is good to a point, but you need guards who are good and active in space and have really proven that. I don't know if we've seen really anything from that one way or another about Brandel. Maybe they've seen something in practice or whatever. I don't even think it has to be that complicated to justify Brandel. We can just hold their feet to the fire and just say, okay, you guys think Brandel's a starting caliber lineman. Okay, good luck. You sign him to a 3-year deal and you're letting him start. It's a cheap deal, but you're letting him start on a 3-year contract. You think he is going to be the guy. Okay. If that's wrong, if he stinks, we get to ask some pretty hard questions. I think we can just kind of like hold them to that. I don't think there needs to be they thought it was a scheme change kind of thing. So I don't think so. That said, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, if McVay is doing it, the McVay disciples probably should consider it. So I just like gap scheme a lot more than zone scheme personally. So I would like it, but that's more of a matter of taste. Smart guy Ryan asks, do you think Flores will move back to more of what he was doing pre-Minnesota because of the added help on D-line? I don't think so. For one, I think it is largely regarded that scheme was successful. And I think Flores went back to the lab and figured out what went wrong in the back half of the season, or in like December, And I think he's coming with like V2.0 of this that is maybe a little more refined now that you've got a season of data on it, rather than just abandoning the thing and going back to something similar. What he did pre-Minnesota isn't all that different from what he did in Minnesota, by the way. He covered things a little differently on the back end, but what he did with the D-line pre-Minnesota and what he did with, Hunter and Wanham and all those guys, pretty similar. I think with the I think he'll maybe pull out some blitz packages and some like stunt formations, not formations, some stunt, we'll say permutation combinations. Maybe that's the word I'm thinking of. That maybe you couldn't do with the more like 4-3 oriented guys that were still very much like Zimmer dudes. And now that you've got like Van Ginkel and stuff and more mobility, somebody really versatile like Turner, like you can do that kind of thing. But what like the key difference between what Flores was doing before and what Flores like in Miami and even in New England before that and what he did in Minnesota was on the back end. And the cornerback group functionally has not changed. They've added Shaq Griffin and that's about it. And lost Joejuan Williams. So the cornerback room is pretty much still the same group of like the entire defensive back room is the same group of people. So they're probably going to do the same thing there. Landon Miller asks, how is the D-line rotation going to work out with Ginkel, Turner, and Grenard? Could that include Turner and Gink playing off ball or even inside? So yes to everything. I think this is going to be a Flores deal, right? Everybody can do a little bit of everything. Josh Metellus will fill the A gap sometimes. Like you're just going to be there, right? Forget just, defensive end and defensive tackle. Everybody's going to do everything. So I am sure we will see a little bit of everything. Nothing can really surprise me, just knowing Flores likes to experiment like that. Rotation-wise, though, in terms of, we're just talking snap counts, I would guess that Grenard and Van Ginkel, at least to start, get most of the work. Defensive ends, their first year can be hit or miss. You can have quiet first years from guys that then kind of like show up the next couple years, and I think that level of patience is probably healthy. So you're probably not going to see, like, it's just not really that common for a rookie edge to just come in and like take over, especially for a free agent that just showed up on a 2-3 year deal for significant money. I'm going to guess that those two guys are the starters and that Turner kind of mixes in more and more as he gets more ready. But this is going to be determined by camp. And the answer is that they are competing for this. Each of those three guys is going to try to maximize their snap count up to a certain cap. Right, nobody's going to play 100% of the snaps. That's not smart for D-line. You want to give them rest, but they're basically going. Their job in camp will be to prove that they deserve up to that cap, and so this will be informed quite a bit by things that haven't happened yet. Skull Chester says, what makes Kevin O'Connell's offense so QB friendly? Of course, this is something you hear everywhere. I think most of the time when people are talking about QB friendly offense, they're referring to, well, you got Jefferson and Addison and Hawkinson, and you've got a proven O-line, and you've got, all these pieces in place where you're not going to hopefully have a whole bunch of additional problems to solve outside of the ones that you cause yourself as a rookie quarterback. But the McVay system has been like the McVay Shanahan thing, because it tends to be really play action heavy. That also has the reputation of like really helping out a quarterback if you use a lot of play action. It doesn't always. Jared Goff is a famous example of this. Jared Goff shouldn't be a turnaround play action quarterback. Shotgun, maybe, get a little fake handoff in there, but he did best when he was able to survey the field for the entirety of his drop back and have that extra time to absorb information. That's kind of what the Lions did that the Rams never did. That got so much more, is getting so much more out of him. Was detailed really interestingly in Jordan Rodrigues' The Play Callers series, the podcast series that came out last year. With kind of going over like how things went wrong with Goff and McVay and why it's like different in Detroit now. But anyways, so that's part of it. I think O'Connell's offense is perhaps crucially, it shares a lot of DNA with what he threw at Michigan. You can see the same concepts. You can see them running flag. You can see them running a lot of choice stuff, reads that you're going to, it's going to help that you're already used to it. And obviously the depths and the timings and all that stuff are different, but that's part of it. I think a non-QB friendly offense would be something like like what the Bears did with Fields. That was not a QB-friendly offense. For one, it didn't have, the supporting cast, especially early, bad O-line, and, your wide receiver one was like Darnell Mooney for a while. But also it was a lot of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reads. They weren't doing a lot of extra motions. It was very static. There weren't a lot of things going on that helped the quarterback. Honestly, QB-friendly scheme is kind of just good scheme when you break it down to what that means. Like play action is just a good idea. You just do that. Motion, if you can teach it, it's just a good idea. You should just like do that. It's just smart. And at least in the NFL, when you get to college and high school level and stuff, that's different. But that's, I guess, what I get from QB friendly. Got a few more questions, a bit of a sparser mailbag this week. It's May, that's fair. But that means we get to spend a little more time on all of them, and I really like that, so that's coming up. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Gametime. It's the best place to find last-minute tickets. Gametime makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier, or perhaps if you don't know if there's going to be a Game 5 or a Game 7 that you maybe want to go to in the Western Conference Finals, if there is going to be one, you got to check out Gametime for those tickets. That is what they specialize in, which is like making spontaneous plans with little notice. That's like their whole deal. Because here's the thing, you can save up to 60% off of last minute tickets buying for not only sporting events, but concerts, comedy, theater, and so on. And you can get a panoramic view from your seat of the venue, so you can make sure you are happy with your view before you even buy. And with their all-in pricing toggled on, you can see your entire price, start to finish, all fees and everything included, your checkout price up front. You're not trying to work anything over on you. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals or Western Conference Finals tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Moving on with this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. A few questions about J.J. McCarthy's development, as we will probably always have. The first one comes from Brian Scheel, who asks, presumably when the regular season begins, Darnold will get the vast majority of practice snaps. How will J.J. grow in that circumstance? Okay, excellent question. Fantastic question. That is kind of the point. That it is designed for that. So when you are preparing for a game, you don't get a lot of time to develop. You're not really looking to enhance your skills. You are looking to memorize a game plan, to get familiar with the major plays, to get a rhythm down on those things, and to understand the scripted first 15 and all of that stuff. And you're preparing for things very specific to the other team, right? If they have like a really good middle linebacker, somebody on scout team will pretend to be that middle linebacker, study their game, and do the things that that player will do, which, by the way, great developmental opportunity for that guy, right? But you can sort of get wrapped up in the week to week, and a lot of the stuff that you learn will sort of only be useful against that opponent. It's information like, well, that corner, when he lines up in press man, he gets beat a lot. So we're going to try to go over the top of him. You're trying to learn that information, and that information stops being helpful when you're not playing that corner anymore. So that's the stuff that Darnold will be dealing with, and J.J. McCarthy can essentially just continue training camp. You can just keep going, working on mechanics. Like you don't get time to sit there. They're not like an NFL practice is to the second hustle. Like it is so tightly scheduled. There is not time for a quarterback's coach to hold up, stop everything, give me 3 dropbacks and let's work on your footwork and let's change something. You don't have time to do that in the middle of a week. Logistically, it's just not possible. So Sam Darnold will be doing that part, and J.J. McCarthy will be working probably with like the assistant QB's coach, or however they decide to delineate that. Will probably be working to the side somewhere else, working on his mechanics and working on the footwork things and whatever else Kevin O'Connell has decided. Maybe Kevin O'Connell works with him a lot on his own, taking reps with the twos for however much they do. But in the week, the twos don't get a ton of reps, but McCarthy will probably be on his own track, not beholden to the burdens of week-to-week game planning. That is the idea behind like benching a guy. Karina asks, what do you think the QB lineup will be as of week 1? And what, in your opinion, goes into that determination based off the current QB room? So it's probably Darnold. I'm going to guess it's Darnold. Ian Rappaport said it's like a true blue QB1 or, QB competition. And I would guess that in a formal sense, sure, right? Like if JJ McCarthy is just clearly way better than Sam Darnold, you're not going to bench him just out of a sense of ceremony. But that doesn't appear to be the plan for the Vikings. The Vikings do seem like they're going, giving JJ McCarthy a lot of things to accomplish, and not really worrying about if those things bleed over into the season. That is what Sam Darnold is here for. If you get him done way early, we love that. We'll take that, but no pressure. That's, I think, where they're at. So I think that's the determination. But in a practical sense, once you get into the day-to-day of camp, if JJ McCarthy just keeps stacking up way better days, you're going to reconsider that. And that's what camp is kind of for. It's to compete and prove yourself. But I think that status quo is the way I like to put it. Pole position is the way I like to put it. Sam Darnold is the status quo QB1. And JJ McCarthy has every opportunity in the world to upset that status quo, but the onus is on him. The ball is in his court. It's going to be that he does something, or that Sam Darnold messes up so bad that you just are like, oh my God, we can't put this guy in a game. Like something extreme needs to happen. If everything sort of goes according to your expectation, then you're going to just stick with Sam Darnold until that is kind of no longer the case. Derek Morin says, let's say JJ progresses and looks like he's an above average starting quarterback at the end of 2024. What do the Vikings do for 2025 to be legit contenders? Have an off season. I think that's probably going to be a more specific question to their needs and who gets hurt and who, whose contract is expiring and who you're going to want to re-sign and not and all that stuff. But if you are going into 2025 and you've got your quarterback and you're set, and assuming JJ's got an extension by then and you're going to go extend Darisaw, that'll be a big one for next offseason. You've got Hawkinson under contract, Addison still on his rookie deal. So you've kind of got your core and a lot of your O-line core. I think Bradbury will be in last year of a deal. I believe he signed through 2025. So you are deciding on that. And it's very, very cuttable. So you're deciding there. But it's like you're making those decisions player by player. And honestly, whether or not JJ McCarthy is like whether or not you're happy with what you've seen from JJ McCarthy, you're probably still looking like, do we think Bradbury is good or not is kind of an independent question. But yeah, then you're trying to answer those needs as best you can with the resources that you have. They've got a lot of cap space. They don't have a lot of draft picks, so you're probably going to see an active free agency again next year. Get excited for March if you're the kind of person that really only enjoys the offseason, which it's just the thing. People are like that. I don't know. If you're like franchise mode people, I guess do your thing. Bustin Fields says, where has Kwesi actually improved the roster? And is it concerning all of our best guys are still Rick's guys? I feel like you already have an answer to this question that you want to hear, the way that that's phrased. But I guess, where has he improved the roster? Quarterback, he did what had to be done, right? Like eventually Kirk needed to be moved on from, and he did that. Whether or not that is an improvement, we kind of have to just put a pin in that one for now. Wide receiver, very much improved that for sure. Went from an aging Adam Thielen to a young and exciting Addison. Addison almost had 1,000-yard season in his rookie year. Like I think it'd be really hard to say that like that wasn't an improvement, especially with I think if Spielman were still here, I think Thielen would still be here, and I don't think you'd have Addison at all. You'd still be just like working with him for as old as he was, just letting him get old with you. Maybe, and you'd just be doing the pay cut thing forever, and he'd be doing the hometown deal, kind of like Harrison Smith is doing it. I think Spielman would have probably offered less aggressive pay cuts, and that would have been the way. That's just my guess. Tight end room, very much absolutely improved. Hawkinson, absolutely. O-line, I mean, I don't know. His first season, he drafted a guard, and that guard is looking pretty good looking into year 3. I mean, on the field. But Ed Ingram had a pretty good 2023. I think that going into 2024, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic there. And then, otherwise it's the same guys. So offensively, you've got a lot. And then defensively, it's been rough for sure. He inherited, a very like old group that was, top heavy and that whole thing. And he's kind of gutted it. And we're still in the midst of a rebuild there. I to your point about all the best players still being Rick's guys, that's a survivor bias thing. Like, of course the best players are Rick's guys. He's not going to keep the bad ones. Kwesi's going to keep the good ones, and good for him, right? You got a good player in the building. He should do. So I don't really think that that's a criticism of him. Like, yeah, he kept Justin Jefferson. Of course he did. It'd be insane if he didn't. So it kind of feels like just finding a way to criticize him for making the right decision, which is something that you only do if you have a conclusion you're trying to work backwards from. Shadow says, what position or role in battle in camp are you most looking forward to? Exclude quarterbacks because that's a cop-out. Fair. That is absolutely a cop-out. Cornerback is going to be the most interesting one, right? Like the most exciting thing that can happen in camp, I think, is one of the young corners, Booth, Evans, Blackman, explodes and just like rips a starting job out of a veteran, out of like Shaquille Griffin's hands, right? Shaquille Griffin is starting with the ones right now. Joe Williams started with the ones in OTAs last year. Don't read too much into it, but it's going to be on one of those guys to rip that job away. And that would be the most exciting thing that can happen. So I'll say that. Watching the edges is going to be really fun too, watching Dallas Turner and all that. And it's always going to be interesting to see who wins those return jobs, those special teams jobs, and that kind of back part of the wide receiver roster where you're looking at, Jalen Naylor and Trent Sherfield and N'Keal Harry, who makes the team of all those guys. That's always really fun. I've got a few more serious questions and some very unserious ones, which I know you all love. Don't lie to me. You love them. You absolutely love them. That'll all come up next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook, and we are getting there to winner take all time in both the NBA and NHL playoffs, no matter who is in them. If you are perhaps watching the NBA Finals and you are sad about that result for whatever reason, maybe you want to lay down a gamble, have something else to root for. If you want to do that, you can go to FanDuel.com. And if you sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon, you can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Anyone who is new, who signs up at FanDuel.com/lockedon, make one $5 bet, whether it's on a spread, a money line, an over-under, an NFL future, whatever it is. Assuming you win that bet, you can get $150 back in bonus bets. 30-1 odds. Can't find that anywhere else at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Onwards and upwards with today's episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thanks so much for hanging out. When you're done here, go check out the Locked On Minnesota Sports YouTube page and their 24/7 streaming channel, all things Minnesota sports, including the sports that are like in season. You can listen to that 24/7. All day long. Just kick it on in the background and it can be your work listening. Let's close out this Twitter Tuesday episode with a few serious questions and then some unserious ones. The next one comes from Shut Up Kevin, who asks, who do you think will be the linebacker for? So this is like maybe the most wide open job on the entire roster. Right now, the person who seems to be holding it is Kamu Grugier-Hill. I guess you call him a Texan linebacker. He's the guy that holds this job. So the starting linebackers are going to be Pace and Cashman. You've got Brian Asamoah, who has a pretty easy claim to a roster spot, though I would say not a guaranteed one. You can absolutely fall apart, but I think if he has even an okay camp, he'll make the team. And then you have Kamu Grugier-Hill. The only other inside linebackers, which I believe is what Kevin is asking for, are undrafted free agents. Abraham Beauplan was an undrafted free agent from last year, who is, I would say, a sneaky dark horse for it. He actually had a camp that some people in the building were pretty excited about, and they got him on the practice squad and all that. And then you have two undrafted rookies in Dallas Gant and KJ Cloyd. And you had a third one that already got cut in Donovan Manuel. Dallas Gant is an interesting one. Kevin, this is the Kevin who came on the show when I was away on my honeymoon. And we talked about Dallas Gant a little bit. So you can go listen to that for some talk about Gant himself. And I also did Dallas Gant's Storytime series, or his Everyman series entry. So there's that as well in a recent episode. But I would say he's the next most likely guy, but it's kind of hard to imagine it not just going to the veteran unless somebody's going to have to come take it, which, hey, everybody's got the opportunity to, who's got it in them. Steezo asks, if someone came on and wanted to trade for Nick Mullins before the start of camp, what draft compensation would you need to receive to accept the offer? I think the existence of Jaren Hall makes this number really low. Like Mullins, I do think is a pretty redundant with Sam Darnold, and redundancy can be okay. But like the sort of up and down, but veteran experience QB is something that, the Vikings have two of those guys. So if somebody came in and wanted Nick Mullins, if you're giving me a pick and not asking for one back, I'm probably saying yes. Like ideally, I would say like a sixth is like where I think that value, like I would feel good if they got a sixth back and didn't have to give anything. But if they did like a 6 for 7 swap, I probably would consider that pretty strongly too. Like if you're giving me anything for Nick Mullins and you're taking, it saves a little bit of money too. It saves like $1.5 million or something stupid like that. Like then sure. And then you just have Jaren Hall and he's your QB3. And QB3 I think is more for developmental guys like Jaren Hall, somebody that you want to teach things and you want to kind of learn and maybe become your backup later. Right. It's like nobody has delusions about him being the long-term starter, especially after last year. But the hope is, hey, maybe he learns a couple things. He can be the backup QB later, especially since Darnold's only on a 1-year deal. And in terms of just like team control, you've got more team control for Jaren Hall as well. So if somebody offered me a draft pick and said, and in return, you just have to buy into Jaren Hall, yeah, it's not going to take a lot for me to do that. But having Sam Darnold in the building is like, well, we kind of have Nick Mullins, but like highly upgraded, right? It's just a souped up like Nick Mullins on steroids. That's what a way to think about Sam Darnold. A way more responsible Nick Mullins, not a responsible Nick Mullins, just a less irresponsible one. Chris says, do you think with the lower injury risk from the kickoff change, teams will lead toward using players closer to starters instead of fringe players? That's a really interesting point. I could see probably not, just because you still have fatigue and you still do have injury risk, right? Like they're just running plays now, but it's still an extra snap and there's still the fatigue angle, right? If you are going to put, your starting center out there to go run 10 yards and do a block right before first down every time, like that probably still isn't wise. But I could see them being on the kickoff side, on the like coverage side of things. I could see them being more willing to use starting players that aren't starting on the defense maybe try to, but I guess you'd have to like teach them how to tackle, and that's always tough. But they do that for kickoffs anyways. I think that it more changes the like size profile of maybe what you will see, just because the format doesn't require as much running, but maybe not. I would still be pretty wary about putting some starters in, but that's an interesting, I wouldn't be shocked for sure. That's just my hypothesis, but my jaw wouldn't hit the floor. Max Garcia says, while reading OTA reports last week, I realized I'd mostly forgotten about Jaren Hall, who's now QB3, QB4. How much do you think having competent QB play in the preseason and practice benefits third and fourth stringers? Sure. If you run the route wrong or if you run the route right and then the ball goes way over your head, like you're going to lose out on a chance to practice catching the ball that one time. You're going to lose out on a rep, right? But that said, if you're the wide receivers coach, you're just looking at the route. You're not looking. You can look and say, oh well, that ball wasn't where it's supposed to be, and you can still judge there. So I think you're still getting a fine job at QB4. Like what Jaren Hall is going to do in camp is he's going to be a handoff machine, which basically anybody can do. So I don't think it's going to have a huge impact there. But sure, right? Like if the ball is where you expect it to be and you can get into a rhythm, that will help you have a better practice, hopefully, or perhaps expose you if you do make a mistake, right? Because now you don't have that. Maybe you would have dropped that pass that went over your head. But now if you have to catch it and you drop it, like maybe you get exposed. Sick Rosa asks, do you have much optimism for an improved screen game in 2024? Okay, so I thought about this one a bunch because I was like, why would you have optimism for an improved screen game or not, right? Like you could look at like the 40 times of your linemen or something like that, but that's not really what it's about. So here's the thing about screens. They're really expensive. And they are expensive at the cost of practice reps. To get screens down right, because they are so intricate, because you have to be at a particular landmark at a particular time, and we're talking fractions of a second, and we're talking margins of 6 inches. It's very precise, and you have to run that 1,000,000 times before you get it down well enough that you're good at it. At the cost of running your staple run plays and your staple pass plays and the things you go to on third down, like at the cost of things that you really would rather run. So I think a lot of teams do let screens just sort of fall through the cracks and say, we'll run it a few times. We'll do it to get out of a 2nd and 20 if we end up there, but we really only want to call this twice a game. And we're going to practice accordingly. We're going to dedicate as many reps as we're going to dedicate to something that we maybe only want to run twice a game. Ideally, hopefully, right? If you lean too far into this, you get into some of the really anemic offenses the Vikings faced during the big Flores heyday that he kind of forced them into, but that's part of it, right? You want to make them want to do 20 screens a game because they probably haven't been practicing with that in mind. So I could see a more dedicated screen game and therefore a more well-executed screen game, but I don't know if that necessarily means good news because it means that you feel that you need that crutch for your quarterback. And that might not necessarily be as good. Like Kirk Cousins didn't need screens. He wanted to push everything down. Like he wanted to have him push everything downfield all the time. So you maybe didn't like focus on it as much. If you have to focus on it, why? That might be concerning, or maybe because you feel like, they can't protect or whatever. Silas Bobbendreyer asks, would a Mavs sweep be worse than 38-7? Boy, I hate that parallel is playing out for you Wolves fans. Full disclosure, I am not a Wolves fan. I grew up going to Wolves games, being a Wolves fan. I just completely disconnected from the sport of basketball entirely. No emotional connection to it. That's just my truth. That said, I'm pulling for you. All right, I'm pulling for all you guys. I hope you can do the 4-game comeback, 3-0, make them blow a 3-0 lead. Let's give people something to make fun of the Mavs for. Probably would be worse for you though, right? Like because those first 3 games were all close. They were all like gut punches. So I think that probably like the 38-7 was over by halftime. And you spent the last part of the half, you're already like coping. You're already getting over it. You're not like Wolves fans aren't looking after they go down 0-2 thinking like you can't lose 2 games bad enough to not be able to win the next 4. That's kind of the point of a 7-game series. So yeah, it probably feels like it would be worse for you, right? But I don't know. People who are actually Wolves fans, let me know. I don't want to speak for you too much. Starry Pepsi product enjoyer says best street tacos in LA. Here's the thing. There are some hole-in-the-wall joints that are very good. There's one called Casitas that is actually kind of a chain. They've got a couple of locations in the Valley that I really like. But it's like a franchise of food trucks that will park out, and they're everywhere. Taco trucks that have like neon signs on them, you basically can't go wrong. Any of those taco trucks, you're going to get great tacos. Avoid super like Instagram-y looking places that have like Dia de los Muertos skeletons on the wall and stuff. That is going to be way too chefed out. Not really what you're looking for, I think, when you're talking about like Mexican street food, unless you are looking for like a chefy experience. But you're probably thinking like a greasy street taco, something like griddle right in front of you. Go to a truck, I would say. That is everything for me on the Locked On Vikings podcast. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.